Well, for more, let's cross now to our correspondent, Hervé Amoric, who's standing by in Glasgow. Hervé, what is in the latest COP26 draft treaty as these negotiations finally enter the last day?
Well, countries are being urged to strengthen their carbon cutting targets by next year, but there's a consensus here that in order to keep the ambitions of the Paris Agreement alive, rich countries in particular need to cut significantly, drastically their CO2 emissions by 2030. That's just to limit to 1.5 degrees the rise of temperature by the next century. And as we enter this, what is supposed to be a last day in talks, there is growing concern, growing fears that that target is not going to be met. There are critics who say not enough is being done. Mary Robinson, the former Irish president, former UNHCR chief, yesterday accused publicly some countries like Russia, Saudi Arabia, China, Australia of playing dirty tricks, of making obstacles to these negotiations. Now, of course, as you mentioned it, pledges were made. There were alliances of goodwill that were formed during these 2 weeks of talks, to aim at a transition out of coal and fossil fuel. But this COP26 was always going to be judged on whether it can identify the toolbox for cutting emissions. These talks will be judged on the merit of the paper that comes out of it. Never mind the pledges, it's what's in the text that will count in the end, what negotiators here can agree, and of course the devil will always be in the detail of the paper.
And Hervé, amongst the options in that toolbox that you mentioned there, one of the major stakes at this summit is assisting vulnerable nations in their transition to net zero economies. How far is COP26 willing to go on that?
Well, there is indeed a consensus that more needs to be made by the world nations, particularly the richest nations, to help vulnerable nations in their transition and just to face basically the impact of global warming. Now, as far as it's concerned up to here, there was a fund of $1 billion a year. There was, $100 billion a year promised to help vulnerable countries. That fund will be available fully available by next year. But there are rumors that the envelope could be strengthened significantly. People talk about $1.3 trillion to help developing countries in their transition. Of course, we will need to see what is in the text at the end of today.
And all right, Hervé, certainly down to the 11th hour at the COP26 summit. We'll be following all of those evolutions as they come in. Thank you to you in Glasgow.